Tehran has tonight issued evacuation warnings for Israeli news channels hours after the Iranian state broadcaster was briefly knocked off air by an airstrike. Explosions have been ringing out across the capital, while in Israel 11 people have been killed by Israeli missile strikes. On this, the fourth day of the escalating conflict. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu claims his country's military campaign is changing the face of the Middle East.
We've eliminated Iran's security leadership, including 3 chiefs of staff, the commander of their air force, 2 heads of intelligence services, 2 of which were killed yesterday, the army and the Revolutionary Guards. We've struck their chief of operations. We're eliminating them one after one. And our hand can still reach further. We're changing, as I said, on the first day of the war, we're changing the face of the Middle East. And this can bring radical changes in Iran itself. Iranians understand the regime is much weaker than they thought. They realise it, and that could lead to results.
For the very latest, let's cross live to our correspondent in Jerusalem. Noga Tarnopolsky is standing by for us this evening. Noga, good to have you with us. We heard from Benjamin Netanyahu, who did an interview with a US broadcaster who's also giving a briefing to reporters there in Israel, suggesting that the war will end when the Iranian supreme leader is killed. Reports that this, though, is something that Donald Trump has told him explicitly not to do. So what is the very latest there?
It's really difficult to understand, although it's interesting to observe the messaging changes just since Friday. Today is Monday. So over a single weekend, we've gone from an Israeli operation that the Prime Minister said was aimed at eliminating the nuclear threat from Iran. Then he added a secondary war goal, war objective, which was to destroy the ballistic missile producing capacity of Iran, also specific. And then today, in this very strange event he held with no journalists present, with remote questions piped in as he stood alone in front of cameras, the Prime Minister of Israel also added a third war objective, and this is to destroy the arc of evil, something completely undefined, both in time and in practical terms. So that's the messaging right now. And yesterday, if the theme of the day yesterday in Israel was, when will the Americans join the fighting? And that does continue to be very prominent in Israeli government messaging today. What emerged later, as you just showed, is Israeli government officials, including the head of the Israeli government, Prime Minister Netanyahu, more than implying that it is an Israeli aim to assassinate the head of the Iranian government structure, the Supreme Leader Khamenei.
And Noga, we're hearing in the last 30 minutes or so that Iran has just begun yet another missile and drone strike. What is the latest in terms of the situation on the ground? And just talk to us a little bit about how life has changed so dramatically for people there between now and, say, last Friday when all of this began.
Yes, it's been a day with, I would say midday, there were a few hours of quiet, but last night there were very many heavy barrages of missiles. As you know, Israel managed to intercept, according to the army, more than 90% of them, but Israel was hit hard by missiles in 5 sites, and 8 people were killed. The day before, 10 people were killed. So it has impacted Israeli life very completely and very suddenly. Until Friday, Israelis were in a war footing. You know, the war in Gaza has lasted now 20 months. I have to tell you that in the last hour, the Israel Defense Forces also announced the death of a soldier fallen in the fighting in Gaza that is ongoing. Yet there was a routine. Restaurants were open, people were going to work, schools obviously were still open. As of Friday, none of that is happening, and Israel has become an active combat zone with entire blocks destroyed in major population centers in posh suburbs of Tel Aviv, no one going to work, and an emergency regulations determining even when banks are open. Everything has changed very suddenly.
And you say there's been confused messaging coming from the government itself. After hearing from Benjamin Netanyahu again this evening, are we any clearer about what exactly his goals and objectives are here?
I would have to say no, because there's so many contradictory messages. I can give you an example also from this evening. The Israeli army hit one of the buildings belonging to the national broadcaster of Iran. Now, it's not a secret that the national broadcaster of Iran is not the BBC, but a propaganda outlet, and it's an outlet in which viewers have been subjected to horrors, such as young Iranians dragged in front of the cameras in the studios in that building ahead of their executions to speak to the public. Truly awful things. Nonetheless, the Israeli army described very clearly that this was a military target and that this building, while pretending to function as a journalistic center, in fact, had a military purpose. An hour hadn't passed before the Prime Minister of Israel, in one of these interviews that you mentioned, completely contradicted what his own army had said and basically said Israel's aim was to destroy the regime's propaganda. So a completely non-military and non-nuclear target, which just by the fact of the Prime Minister saying it could actually endanger diplomatic support for Israel's military operation in Iran.
Noga, we'll leave it there for now, but thanks so much for joining us with that update. That is our correspondent in Israel, in Jerusalem, Noga Tarnopolsky.